This is CGTN, China Global Television Network.
Hello and welcome to Global Business Africa with insights into Africa's ever-changing business landscape. I'm Hannah Viviers in the Kenyan capital, Nairobi, where it's at 9 p.m. It's 2 p.m. in Washington, D.C. and 2 a.m. in Beijing. Wherever you're joining us from, welcome. First of all, let's take a look at how the markets fared today. Big news on the markets today is that ongoing EU summit where leaders were at loggerheads over the recovery package for that regional bloc. We'll be bringing you more details on that story. Taking a look at how the stock market fared today. It was generally a good day for the markets, despite the concerning news coming out of South Africa regarding rising coronavirus infections. The JSE markets closed in the green, boosted primarily by resources. An index of gold stocks in Johannesburg rose as much as 2.7% to a fresh all-time high in trade on Monday. The JSE was up just over 0.6% today. Kenya's NSE 20 saw modest gains today, ticking up 0.2%. Well, let's take a look at other news that's making headlines. Police launch money laundering investigation on Zimbabwe's leading telecoms mobile phone operator. Nigeria's targets to cut data costs by 2025. And EU leaders near a compromise on a coronavirus stimulus package. We begin tonight's bulletin in Zimbabwe, where the largest mobile phone operator, Econet Wireless, is seeking court orders to suspend a police warrant against the firm. Econet is being accused by the government of money laundering. The police on Friday asked Econet, which has more than 11 million subscribers, to hand over details of its mobile money transactions and subscribers. The government claims that it's creating fictitious mobile money and converting it to cash to facilitate purchasing of foreign currency on the black market. The forex is then moved out of Zimbabwe. Econet says the police warrant is unconstitutional. Zimbabwe's government has already suspended some of Econet's mobile money transactions after it halted all trade on the local stock exchange last month. Well, for more analysis on that story, we're now joined by CGTN's Farai Mwakatuya, who is in Harare for us. Farai, thank you so much for joining us. Farai, let's just start with the update. What are you hearing about what the latest is on this story? What we had heard was that there was a warrant against Econet Wireless and suspensions of some of its mobile money transactions. What are the developments so far, Farai?
Well, indeed, there was that warrant where the police are seeking to get that information from Econet Wireless in terms of its subscribers, saying that they have information to the effect that the company is engaged in money laundering, is creating these fictitious balances, using them to buy foreign currency, and also that this is what's driving up this parallel market, that Econet has not been cooperative in the past in terms of being more stringent in its KYC requirements, in cooperating with the authorities in terms of, stamping out these illegal activities that Econet is in fact enabling or facilitating the trade in terms of the parallel market for foreign currency. Econet obviously saying that these measures are unconstitutional, that handing over all this information is unconstitutional. It's handing over private and confidential information, which it shouldn't, that it's confidential information between itself and its subscribers. And so what we are likely to see is quite a protracted legal battle in terms of Econet trying to challenge this. But the police and the authorities here certainly seem intent on seeing this through. It's not the first time that they've wanted to, go after Econet in this regard, and so we think that they will try and pursue it and press on with these allegations.
Farai, one of the reasons mobile money is hugely popular in Zimbabwe is due to cash shortages. How is the suspension of some of Econet's mobile money transactions impacting people in Zimbabwe right now?
Well, indeed, it is quite disruptive. The impact has been quite severe. A case in point that came to light just a few days ago was in Parliament, where 300,000 small-scale cotton farmers have been unable to access their payment for cotton that they've delivered to the cotton company because they don't have bank accounts, and so they've traditionally been paid using mobile money and using this EcoCash platform. But because these accounts are frozen and there are restrictions in terms of what amounts can be paid out, these over 300,000 farmers are effectively stranded because they can't get their payments out. They can't therefore pay their laborers or stock up for the next farming season. That's just one case in point that's come to the light because it was raised in Parliament. But across the board, there are people who have been unable to, make payments for utilities, for instance, make payment for rentals, amongst others, because the use of EcoCash has been so pervasive. As much as 95% of mobile money transactions were via EcoCash, and so the fact that there are limits in terms of what can be transacted and what can be sent across, that has had a profound impact. And a lot of people are having to try and navigate or find a new way around these restrictions, and that will take time.
Farai, and with what you've just described now, amidst the COVID-19 pandemic and all the challenges that outbreak is bringing, but let's just go to what Econet Wireless might be doing in terms of response. It has denied the charges brought against it. What are you hearing about how it plans to respond? You had mentioned something about legal battles that we could see in the coming days.
Well, certainly we know that they will try to challenge this, and we've heard some legal experts coming out and saying independently that it's unconstitutional, that it's wrong to divulge all this information, this subscriber information, confidential subscriber information. It's unconstitutional. It's a violation of those rights. There are fears, some people suggesting that this information might be used for other purposes and not necessarily specific to this investigation. And so we're likely to see, as we've seen in the past, Econet try to stand up to this, to try and challenge it, certainly in the courts, and continue to reassure its customers that, look, they will not go about divulging this information that is being required. As I said in the past, we've seen Econet stick to its guns and say, look, we've not done anything wrong, that everything we've done is above board, and take the legal route in terms of those challenges. And it's likely that we will see that route pursued this time around as well, and also arguing on the constitutional grounds where they will say this is private, confidential information that cannot be made public for whatever reason.
Thank you so much for joining us. Farai Mokotia joining us live there from Harare, Zimbabwe. We're saying in Zimbabwe, where after a drought and cyclone in 2019, this year was all about recovery in that country. However, efforts to bounce back economically have been stifled by the COVID-19 pandemic. The country's finance minister has revised growth figures in his midterm budget review and expects the economy to shrink by 4.5%.
There will be contraction across all major sectors, including mining, which will shrink by 4.1%, manufacturing 10.8%, and tourism 7.4%. Government's response is to maintain fiscal discipline.
When you look at the macroeconomic thrust and framework, it hasn't really changed. I think we are still steeped in austerity. Because when you also look at our COVID-19 health expenditure for the first half of the year, I think we're not doing as well as we should. So I think it's going to be very, very difficult. And the government doesn't actually have the degrees of freedom probably to upscale social expenditures. But I think that's a major challenge now.
Despite the impact of COVID-19 as well as rampant inflation, Professor Mthuli Ncube says he won't require a supplementary budget, which could mean no big wage increase for public servants. They're up in arms after demands for higher pay.
We honestly expected them to loosen things and loosen the bolts and make it a point that they address the demands of the workers. Because as far as we are concerned, workers are at their poorest, their weakest and the lowest ebb since independence.
Government workers say their earnings have been eroded by inflation, which eased marginally to 737% in June. The finance minister is optimistic the retreat will continue to 300% by year end.
He believes that now with the new auction system that's coming in, it's going to stabilize the exchange rate, which will obviously reduce the pressure on prices. And he said that a lot of retailers and business were forward pricing, in other words, anticipating where the exchange rate would grow and therefore pricing their products accordingly. He said that will disappear with the auction as more and more players can access foreign currency in the auction system.
Increased output of traditional grains is also anticipated to subdue food inflation. Farai Mwakutuya, CGTN, Harare, Zimbabwe.
Let's move over to East Africa now, where the Kenyan credit market is coming under severe pressure as the COVID-19 pandemic impacts that economy. According to the latest TransUnion Q1 2020 Kenya Market Analytics report, the market is facing an increase in defaults and non-performing loans. The report showed an increased demand for trade, mobile, and personal loans in Q1 of 2020, with a total number of loan accounts increasing by 21% from $1 million in Q4 2019 to $1.2 million in Q1 of 2020. Approximately 92% of accounts opened were mobile loans, with more than 40 mobile loan lenders active in the Kenyan market. However, there was a sharp decline in business loans despite the repeal of the interest cap in November 2019. TransUnion's data showed that 27,000 new business loans in Q1 2020 were down from 58,000 in Q4 2019. Well, earlier we spoke to TransUnion's Samuel Tayengwa, who gave us some insight into the prospects of the Kenyan market. Here's that interview.
I'd like to believe we're not necessarily in a crisis mode, but I think we are looking at ways and means to mitigate the impact of COVID. I think everyone across the globe is looking at how best can organizations, can institutions, can economies withstand what the COVID impact has caused. And Kenya is no different to what everybody is trying to do. And at TransUnion, what we have done is to try to give a baseline view in as far as insights are concerned, giving institutions a pre-COVID analysis of what the market was looking like. And this enables better continuation of strategic decisions as we navigate the COVID-19 terrain. As it is right now, everybody's still trying to get into grips of what the COVID is doing to different levels of our economies, and having data and information and insights at our fingertips is going to help inform better strategic decisions going forward. So we're not really in a crisis mode, or we're not really in an Armageddon as other institutions are putting it across, but I think we are looking at ways of how can we mitigate with information.
Samuel, taking a look at Nairobi Stock Exchange, we saw a huge dip late in March. We haven't seen much recovery since compared to the early February levels. What are you reading into that?
If you look at it right, as when the COVID cases started to be reported in Nairobi, what was happening was we're having a hive of an economy, right? The impact had not been felt as yet. But what we are starting to see is that with government coming in to try and flatten the curve, following other international countries in trying to deal with the impact of COVID, we started seeing whether partial lockdown or hard lockdowns in as far as movement goes, or in far as economic activities goes. And that in itself created an impact on the economy. So obviously with that goes, we have started to see that the rate at which the economic activities have been impacted had been a bit dire compared to pre-COVID positions. So I think what we're trying to work with here is how can organizations, how can consumers start to stabilize in as far as managing the impact of COVID.
Samuel, which part of the credit market is most at risk at the moment here in Kenya?
If we look at the numbers, right, Kenya had predominantly become a mobile lending market, right? If you look when we released this report, it's a Q1 report, which is a pre-COVID view, but we also had a Q4 analysis of 2019. And what we saw is that there was a decline in new business in as far as mobile lending goes. I mean, the banking sector controls close to about 90% of that. Banks and financial institutions are trying to maintain liquidity. I mean, before COVID happened, obviously we had the interest rate repeal, and banks were trying to find ways to still stabilize because of that. So obviously with that and going with that, we've seen that mobile lending has been one of the product lines in as far as credit lending goes that has started seeing the impact.
Now, speak to us about some of the positives, because we're talking a lot about some of the negative impacts, and there has been a lot of negative impact, but are you seeing some positives, and which sectors seem to be resilient?
I think the positive is how has institutions been met to prepare for market dynamics, right? So I think for me that has been the biggest positive. Things like the digitization aspect of how institutions can still continue to interact with their customers. We did an analysis where we looked at demographic consumption. I mean, obviously your Gen Z, which is new to credit, which is new to market, is going to be the opportunity for most institutions to start working with. We've started seeing the millennial curve where you find other institutions starting to create in-house boot camps to drive fintech. So fintech is going to be the biggest opportunity for most of the credit lending space, because that's where opportunities would lie. If you think of how resilient fintech shot out in 2008 after the financial crisis, we are going to predict a similar surge of fintech type of sustainability in the Kenyan market. So financial institutions need to start thinking about ways and means to in-house these kind of institutions, work with them, give them strategies to sustain themselves and fund such type of businesses so that we can see an economy that will be thriving in this kind of period that we are in.
Well, let's take a look at your corporate news. Petra Diamonds has agreed to sell its Botswana exploration assets to Botswana Diamonds for $300,000 and a 5% royalty on future revenues. The purchase price will be payable in 2 equal installments on or before August the 31st, 2021 and August the 31st, 2022. Botswana Diamonds also has the option to buy out the royalty for $2 million in cash. Kenya's I&M Holdings plans to acquire 90% of Uganda's Orient Bank. The company entered into an agreement with the shareholders of Orient Bank Limited for the sale and purchase of incorporated shares comprising 90% of the issued share capital of Orient Bank Limited on the 17th of July 2020. Orient Bank owns a total asset base of $219 million. Spur Corporation CEO Pierre Fantonder will retire at the end of the year after leading the restaurant group for 24 years. Spur owns Spur Steak Ranches, Italian food franchise Panarotti's, seafood restaurant John Dory's, burger joint Rockamama's, and steak restaurant Hussar Grill. 61-year-old Pierre has served as managing director and CEO since 1996. He joined the group in 1982 as a junior restaurant manager and was appointed to the holding company board 10 years later. And Noble Energy's shares surged 6.8% in pre-market trade on Monday after the Wall Street Journal reported that Chevron Corporation has neared an all-stock deal to buy the oil and gas producer for about $5 billion, including Noble's debt. The deal will be valued at about $13 billion. Chevron stock fell 1.3% ahead of the open. Well, let's now take a look at news that's coming up. Nigeria targets to cut data costs by 2025. And a multi-million-dollar bakery is unveiled in Ethiopia.
The world economy as we know it is about to change. Global business reports highlight emerging markets, developing countries, and dynamic sectors worldwide. We feature top analysts and newsmakers to provide perspectives on every facet of business. From an on-the-ground perspective, we provide you with balanced and objective assessments. Fast, sharp, and insightful. Global Business, only on CGTN.
There's more to this place than just glorious landscapes. There's more to it than just, say, Table Mountain or glorious, endless salt flats. There's more to it than countries that are home to some of the deepest mines in the world. There is so much more to this place, even if it is home to some of the finest diamonds on the planet. It is the sheer diversity of the people who call Southern Africa home, and the relentless drive to make it a better place that make it so special. And we know that because this too is home. No one knows Southern Africa like we do. CGTN, see the difference.
Welcome back to Global Business. Nigerian government plans to halve the cost of data and internet services in the next 5 years. The move is set to fully digitize Africa's biggest economy. It will also see roughly 180 million Nigerians have access to broadband internet service by 2025. With more on this, here's CGTN's Deji Badmos.
Right inside this hall, Nigeria is trying to walk the talk on its plan to fully digitalize its economy in the next 5 years. It's a training for journalists to prepare them for the coming digital economy. A similar training is being done for farmers, traders, and many more groups, including rural dwellers. Spearheading the ambitious digitalization drive is the country's Minister of Communication and Digital Economy.
We are targeting 180 million Nigerians to have access to broadband by 2025. This is part of promoting digital economy. With that broadband plan, our target in our rural areas is a minimum of 10 gigabit per second. In urban cities, up to 25 MB per second, a minimum of that. And we are targeting that by 2025, the penetration of broadband, we want to achieve a minimum of 70%.
Nigeria's current broadband penetration is at about 40%. And without driving that figure up, the country's digital economy initiative would only be a pipe dream.
Government has to provide the enabling environment. Investors need to be welcome. We need to ensure the stability in our currency. We must overcome this problem of this pandemic. I think with all things being equal, we should be able to achieve 80% penetration in 5 years.
But cost is a key element to achieving that penetration and making the digital economy initiative a reality. The cost of internet service in Nigeria is still very prohibitive and far beyond the reach of the estimated 82.9 million Nigerians who live in poverty. The government says it hopes to cut internet cost by half within the next 5 years. It's already cut down on the cost of right-of-way, making it easier for operators to deploy their infrastructure.
The governments of many states have reduced right-of-way significantly. In some cases, some are taking it down to as low as 0. With these efforts, collectively with what the government in the center is doing, we think it will reduce the cost of deploying infrastructure.
We want to ensure that the data you purchase for 10,000 naira, by then it could not be more than 3,000 naira. And that is why we are making all this intervention so that unnecessary spending by operators will not be done. Government will provide security for the infrastructure. Right of way is almost free now. So these are the complaints that why the price is high.
Nigeria's dream for digital economy is one where most of government businesses would go digital, thereby cutting the cost of governance and ensure more openness and transparency in government. The private sector is already ahead of the government in the digital space, but the outbreak of the COVID-19 pandemic has now forced the government to quicken its pace on the country's digital economy initiative. Deji Badmos, CGTN, Lagos, Nigeria.
Vodacom has partnered with China's Alipay to develop a new super app that will allow customers to make payments, stream video, and make travel arrangements among a host of other services. South Africa's largest mobile operator is creating a platform that will aggregate different merchants and service providers so that users can do all their business online and never have to leave the app. Tencent's WeChat is an example of a super app as it allows users to order food, hail rides, play games, and make payments on a growing list of services. Vodacom recently launched an Android-based point-of-sale device for merchants as part of the development. The firm also says that the platform will be network agnostic, as it will be available to all South Africans, even those who are not on Vodacom. Ethiopian poultry farmers have been forced to slaughter hundreds of thousands of chicks as the sector reels from a collapse in demand for chicken from the hotel sector because of the pandemic. Alexandria Majala has the details.
Workers at a chicken farm on the outskirts of Addis Ababa, which is also the biggest supplier of poultry products in Ethiopia's capital, face a grim task. Between May and June 2020, they culled thousands of young chicks, most of them just a day old.
Totally, I think we destroyed around 650,000 chickens culled in those 5 weeks, and we have to actually pull some eggs from our hatchery so that we can actually destroy them as eggs instead of chickens.
The sector is reeling from a collapse in demand from the local hotel sector because of the COVID-19 pandemic. Ethiopia's movement restrictions to try to contain the novel virus, which causes COVID-19, has led hotels in Addis Ababa to reduce operations or close, removing a major source of demand for poultry products.
Most of our suppliers are not working now. They are highly affected. For example, when you see as a dairy product suppliers, meat product suppliers, and vegetable and everything, every sector is affected. So just if you are not working, just they can't move. Okay. Not only that, just the import and export activities are not properly functioning. Even it will be difficult for us to pay for our employees if we are not paying. If we are not working, just it's difficult for us to pay for our employees.
The impact is extremely disrupting for the sector and has potentially devastating social consequences in a country where nearly 15 million people could need government help because of the pandemic.
This sector used to employ a vast group of society in different regions of the country, whether it is the youth or women across all age groups. Now, because we are not receiving day-old chicks as the supply chain is totally disrupted, the people employed in the sector are not working at all. I just cannot give you the number of people employed in this sector, but it is vast. Now, all these people don't have anything to do. This is not something you can simply dismiss.
The hotel sector has been largely paralyzed and unable to pay staff. According to the latest official data, the country has confirmed nearly 10,000 coronavirus cases and over 160 deaths. Alexandria Majala for CGTN.
Meanwhile, Ethiopia has inaugurated a landmark bread factory. The $26 million facility highlights the country's successful path towards food security and industrialization. It has a potential of baking 2 million loaves of bread daily and has led to the creation of more than 3,500 direct jobs from Addis Ababa. Here's CGTN's Girum Chala with more.
Welcome to Ethiopia's majestic state-of-the-art bread factory, located in the capital, Addis Ababa. It's named Sugar Flour and Bread Factory and is built on a land size of 6,000 square meters. Here, 80,000 loaves of bread per hour and a total of 1.6 million loaves of bread are baked every day.
This plant is mainly established to produce bread. However, to produce bread, it's mandatory to have sufficient flour supply. For that, we have built right next to this factory a flour mill which guarantees the quality, consistency and efficiency of our bread factory. The flour plant mills at least 2,000 quintals of wheat every day and supplies flour to this plant under an automated system. Then the dough makers' machines take over and mixes the ingredients before handing over to shapers. And then it gets to the baking oven where we finally get to see this bread.
This is an initiative by Ethiopia's government which has been successfully executed by the country's giant investment company, Midrock Horizon Plantations. The Pro plan aims to provide bread to citizens with a price 3 times less than the market.
So Sheikh Mohammed appreciated that call and So we looked into that opportunity that gives relieves some of the burden on the people, because not only bread is expensive in Ethiopia, but also scarce.
Giant bread production project cost the company 900 million birr, which is equivalent to $26 million. And the government has been on top of it all through to facilitate its implementation. Now, residents, particularly in the capital Addis Ababa, get bread deliveries every morning, and the youth in this makeshift shop sell the bread to the public. People are beginning to appreciate the role sugar bread is playing.
We are truly excited for the opportunity that has been created for us to access bread that is not only cheap, but is of quality and is also manufactured with the right grain. We feel blessed to see all these changes.
This bread factory has more than 3,400 employees working in both its bakery and flour plant, which are built side by side. The mostly young workers here, like Nabil Machal, were largely unemployed until the establishment of the factory gave them this job opportunity.
I studied food engineering, and what I've learned here has helped in food processing while working here. This is one of the areas I got the opportunity to work in. I have also developed the knowledge of baking bread. I have dreams to make an even bigger contribution.
Investors say more work needs to be done to enhance availability of food in Ethiopia.
To address food security issue, the nation needs to work hard on import substitution and to produce food 100% locally. Ethiopia can do that. With the right commercial investors and policy, we have a weather that no one has. All seasons can be produced in Ethiopia.
The government is engaging in mega mechanized agricultural schemes such as large-scale wheat farms. The aim is to locally produce wheat out of local efforts and once and for all avoid any grain imports. Group Dala CGTN, Addis Ababa, Ethiopia.
It's time now for a short break and return. More news making headlines in the world of business. EU leaders near a compromise on a coronavirus stimulus package. And Chinese cinemas reopen with safety measures.
No war, no one again, he can hold in guns.
Machine guns from police forces toward the protesters.
Were you worried about your life at that particular time? Not at all.
The Excellency, thank you very much for your time now. What is your assessment of the state of the continent today?
Africa has the potential to power itself.
Excuse me.
Business in Africa is at a crossroads. We celebrate those who are adopting and thriving despite the challenges, from grassroots to big businesses. Global Business takes you along for the ride as we track the making of a giant.
Only on CGTN.
How will your world change today? What happens here? What happens there? Or what you make happen for yourself? If it matters to you, it matters to us too. Your stories are the stories that need to be told. Africa Live. Find your voice.
Well, let's move to Europe, where leaders showed the first signs of compromise in a massive coronavirus stimulus plan today that came as talks in Brussels extended to a fourth day. The marathon discussions have focused on a 1.8 trillion euro or about $2 trillion coronavirus plan. The main division is between countries hit hardest by the virus and some who seek to limit the size of the fund. The president of the European Council, Charles Michel, earlier urged the 27 leaders to achieve Mission Impossible, reminding them that many people around the world had died in the pandemic. Or for the latest on this story, we're now joined live by Tony Waterman, who is in Brussels. Thank you for joining us, Tony. Tony, you've been following the Marathon Summit. What is the latest from the meeting?
Well, Hannah, the European Council President Charles Michel in just the past hour has released a new proposal to all of the EU leaders. It comes with a number of changes which are sure to appease and also irritate at the same time. The overall size of this recovery fund would stay the same at about $857 billion US, but the allotment for grants, this money which does not need to be paid back, would be trimmed from $570 billion to $445 billion. This has been a major sticking point, so this could go a long way in appeasing some of the frugal four. It's still going to be too high for them and still too low for those harder hit southern countries, but this appears to be, this $445 billion appears to be a number that everybody is willing to accept on conditions, of course. So in exchange for this higher than desired grant allocation, the frugal four could see, most of them at least, could see their rebates being increased in the next EU long-term budget, which is being negotiated alongside this recovery fund. Austria, for example, would see a doubling of their rebate. It also would allow for countries to raise objections if this money that is being doled out to these countries isn't being used in tandem with economic reforms to make these economies more resilient in the future. This was something that the Netherlands had been pushing for very strongly. It also, though, proposes some very deep cuts when it comes to research, innovation, and health spending, which is already garnering a lot of criticism online. So the leaders now have to look over this new proposal. They have to digest it. They have to debate it. And it's shaping up to be yet another long night here in Brussels.
Tony, some are looking at the situation and seeing a divided EU. When is that? Is that the case, or could it just be that this is not about division, but rather a case of how enormous and complex this financially tackling this pandemic actually is?
Yeah, I think it's a little bit of both. As you mentioned, this is an amount of mudslinging during this summit, much more than we've seen in other gatherings. The Polish Prime Minister, for example, called the Frugal Four, the group that's trying to trim the size of this recovery package, a, quote, group of stingy, egotistic states. The Italian Prime Minister, Giuseppe Conte, saying that the Europe was under blackmail by the frugals. So this name calling, yes, is about the divisions, but it's also about the nature of this problem. This is not just about finances like we saw during the sovereign debt crisis. This is very emotional. There have been some 135,000 lives lost in Europe to coronavirus. Millions of people's lives have been completely disrupted. They've lost their jobs, perhaps have lost their businesses or lost their homes. So this is a very emotional issue. And the very notion that Europe wouldn't come together and unify and that money wouldn't be spent to help prop up these countries, which did not make a poor financial decision and bring this upon themselves, but rather were hit by something that has been quite indiscriminate in terms of its transmission into countries, is rubbing people, a lot of people here, the wrong way. There is also concerns, of course, about the distortion in the single market. Some of the countries which have been hardest hit, Italy, Spain, Greece to a lesser extent, these are countries which were already shouldering very heavy debt loads and now haven't had the financial bandwidth to really pull themselves back from the financial cliff, much the way that a country like Germany, which has very deep coffers, has been able to do. So these divisions have been exacerbated by this pandemic.
Tony, talking about division, talking about complexity of this matter, in light of what is happening with the coronavirus pandemic, it's taken center stage, but we can't forget that there's still that issue of Brexit on the table. Have there been any discussions regarding that at the summit at all?
Yeah, Brexit, remember that, right? This is not something that's on the agenda right now, but of course it's looming quite large in the background because the UK's exit from the EU left an $80 billion hole in the long-term budget, which of course is being negotiated alongside this recovery fund. The Brexit talks themselves are resuming today, so the chief negotiators, David Frost and Michel Barnier, they are meeting for dinner tonight, and then tomorrow their teams are going to be getting together in London to continue these conversations. Both sides have said that they will ramp up the talks, but the last round of negotiations was cut short because of a lack of progress. They still remain very much divided when it comes to things like fisheries and the level playing field and governance going forward. But really time is running out here because they really only have until October, the end of October, if you're being pushing it to the edge there, to get a deal, to get it ratified and have it in place by the end of the year. If that does not happen, then the UK will not have a trade agreement with the EU and they'll have to revert back to WTO rules, which would then put tariffs back in place.
Tony, thank you so much for that in-depth reporting of what's happening right now. Thank you so much, Tony Waterman, joining us live from Brussels. Well, Chinese cinemas are finally reopening today after being closed for almost 6 months. Strict health checks and audience limits are in place to keep moviegoers safe. Our reporter takes a look at how cinemas are recovering for their long shutdowns.
This may be an ordinary workday, but it was a great moment for plenty of movie lovers. At around 9:30 this morning, the cinema in Shanghai's Changning district welcomed its first audience in almost half a year. They just couldn't wait to watch the film, A First Farewell, which debuted today.
Tickets for the film sold out in 1 hour. We'll have 13 screenings today, but in the past, we usually had more than 40 a day. There's now a 1.5 hour break between each screening for a thorough disinfection. 4 of the showings have sold out.
Well-known TV host Wang Han held a live stream on e-commerce platform Taobao Saturday night, selling tickets for the newly released movie. More than 5 million people watched and bought almost 10,000 tickets.
People never stopped wanting to watch movies, but theater closures during the pandemic hurt the cinema companies badly. China's biggest movie theater operator, Wanda Film Holding, reported a loss of more than 1.5 billion yuan in the first half of the year. Jingyi Media lost more than 300 million yuan. The theaters are now back in business, but are still restricted to only 30% of normal audience capacity. Is there any way for them to get out of the woods?
As a first step, Wanda Film signed a new deal with IMAX last week to expand their partnership, which will enable the company to upgrade to the latest IMAX screening technology in its 10 top grossing cinemas, including Beijing CBD Wanda IMAX and Shanghai Wujiaochang Wanda IMAX. 10 additional systems will be installed in new locations. IMAX is providing the expensive systems on a revenue-sharing basis rather than asking the cinemas to pay for them upfront.
Wanda is figuring that more moviegoers will focus on a high-quality movie experience, such as IMAX. Though cinemas suffered a lot during the pandemic, many leading companies are investing, bucking the trend. They're trying to establish a top-tier cinema chain with a high reputation, which will be good for their long-term development.
Several A-share stocks in the film sector got a big boost today from the news that China will reopen cinemas in low-risk areas. Beijing Hualu Baina jumped by the daily limit this morning to 6.3 yuan. Other companies such as Talent Television and Film, China Film, and Huayi Brothers all saw their stock prices rise. Gu says the hard times have forced some immature hot money to quit the movie sector, and that should create a healthier financial environment for the film industry long term.
Most of the unprofessional funds have quit, leaving only long-term funds with solid roots in the film industry. This is a very good opportunity for a thoroughgoing reform in the sector. Companies are now returning to their core capabilities, which is producing high-quality work. After this reshuffle, the survivors will be able to grow stronger in the future.
Aiding the recovery is the fact that the first major film event to take place in China since the virus outbreak is on the way. The 23rd Shanghai International Film Festival will begin Saturday and run until August 2nd. Some cinemas are already getting ready.
We have reduced the number of film screenings this year. Each hall will have 5 screenings a day, instead of 6 or 7. The film festival should give a lot of encouragement to the movie lovers. More moviegoers should be returning to cinemas after festival.
Theater capacity during the film festival will still be capped at 30%, which means about 600 people at a time will be able to view a film at the theater. Ticket sales for the film festival's international show started today at dianying.taobao.com. Films will be shown at 29 cinemas around the city, but tickets will be sold only online. Zhang Shixuan, ICS for CGTN, Shanghai.
Being a coffee producer for many in the sector means living a life of uncertainty. Nothing is predictable until the bean is bagged and cupped and the price has been paid. As a result, coffee producers are often poorly paid. But as CGTN's Alistair Beverstock now reports from Mexico, one collective is seeking to change this.
When it comes to global economics, a general rule is that the greater the demand for a product, the more money it can be sold for. But not when it comes to coffee. Since 2012, the coffee market worldwide has grown by more than 50%, generating some $430 billion in yearly revenue today. Yet producers say they're not getting paid any more for their crop. It's a problem Mexican economist and entrepreneur Alberto Rezabal has puzzled over.
In a traditional coffee supply chain, there are an average of 8 or 9 middlemen between the farmer and the final consumer, and the farmer gets less than 1% of the total value of the cup of coffee that is sold. So the most important thing was that we had to stop selling raw coffee beans.
Alberto went to Chiapas state, where Mexico meets Guatemala, and founded a region-wide coffee cooperative which sees producers like Jose Andres control their supply chain, harvesting, roasting, transporting and turning it into espresso in their own Mexico City coffee shop.
When I was young and worked with my father, our coffee plantations were very small and we didn't have much production. But my father was the first producer from our community to join the cooperative, and it brought many benefits. So we decided to dedicate ourselves to it full time.
The company is called Yomol Atel, Setzal Mayan for Together We Work, Together We Dream, and today provides work and a better income for more than 100 families. And this is where the Celtal Mayan coffee ends up, 900 kilometers from Chiapas in the Mexican capital. Here, there is a clear market willing to pay top prices for premium coffee, and the steady growth has allowed the collective to expand, opening several more coffee shops in and around the capital. But in addition to their own shops, the collective seeks relationships with similar-minded clients in the hope of spreading their own business philosophy beyond Mexico's borders.
We are starting to work with a distributor in the United States. The strategy we are using is finding clients who understand the project we are building, who know all of the work that goes into a cup of coffee, and that more than an economic transaction, that we generate human relationships through our activities.
A cup of coffee that symbolizes a fairer world. Alistair Baverstock for CGTN, Chilon, Mexico.
Well, let's take a look at how the commodity prices fared today. The commodities market showing some positivity in line with how the markets fared generally across the board today. Brent crude still under that $50 a barrel level, indicative of the continued pressure on the global economy. So while we might be seeing some upticks in trade, the market is still factoring in uncertainty in economies across the globe. And of course, gold is still going strong at $1,815.96. It was up ever so slightly at 0.3% today. It's time now for us to take a short break and return. More news, including a South Africa cheesemaker returns to business after coronavirus lockdown. Well, with the closure of restaurants and markets due to COVID-19, cheese sales have fallen by nearly 60% in the last 2 months. This, however, has not stopped one South African artisanal cheesery from pursuing a path of growth. On Grassroots tonight, CGTN's Mahia Mutwa explores what Noah's Cheese is doing to boost demand for locally made cheese.
Cheddar making was put on hold when COVID-19 struck this artisanal cheesery in central South Africa. Hard cheeses requiring months of ripening were no longer viable, and the small business battled to stay afloat. Noah's Cheese only managed to produce small amounts of its signature smoked mozzarella and chili-infused string cheese. But with the restrictions now eased and customers trickling back, there could be a surge in demand for locally produced food.
So the message is eat what is in season, know where your food is coming from, and support the farmer or the producer directly where you can. And we talk about good, clean, fair food.
Over the last few months, the owners of Noah's Cheese have worked hard to find new delis and are currently negotiating shelf space with local supermarket chains. They also have high hopes in the launch of an online shop that will deliver cheese directly to customers stuck at home.
So it has affected us, but we're carrying on, and we now obviously have to reinvent yourself. So we're definitely going to basically want to launch our online store within the next 2 weeks, so that we can ship to anywhere in the country. I think that's a route that everybody's taking. You have to adapt or die.
Nestled at the bottom of a rock formation named after Mount Ararat, Noah's Cheese runs entirely on solar energy and sources its raw materials from surrounding land. For instance, the firm's mozzarella cheese is smoked with wood from a neighboring apple farm. Condiments, on the other hand, are made with fruit pulp left over from nearby gin breweries. This unusual setup has helped Noah's Cheese to survive the crushing impact of COVID-19.
People helped us, friends helped us financially, and fortunately we're off the grid, so other expenses like electricity, for instance, we don't have to pay electricity,
South Africa has a growing market of foodies seeking more sophisticated flavors than factory-made feta and gouda. Artisanal cheeseries have entered the scene to meet this demand, adapting classic techniques from France and Italy to local ingredients. For Noah's Cheese, the goal is now to tap into the budding market. Mahia Mutwa, CGTN.
Well, the export of finished gold products and jewelry has for years been seen as one of Egypt's most promising business activities. In the first 5 months of 2020, the country's gold exports increased by 78% compared to the previous year. Now, the Egyptian government has partnered with the private sector to establish the first technical gold craft high school in the region. Here is CGTN's Adel El Mrouhi with more.
Egypt is planning to build a gold crafts industrial zone near the Suez Canal to boost its growing exports of the precious metal. In an attempt at maximizing the addition of value to domestically mined gold, the nation is adopting a new policy to search for talented workers.
In the past decades, workers in this field have been bringing their relatives to teach them the craft. But the industry is now much bigger and it's becoming about art. We are now moving to search for talented people, some that can draw while others can weld. If we take these kids from a young age and enrich their talent with education, that will reflect greatly on the industry and we will be able to compete better internationally.
The Ministry of Education has partnered with one of the leading gold manufacturers to establish this technical gold crafts school. Applicants must get above average grades in middle school and pass talent tests. 1,125 students applied for training, but only 200 have been accepted.
The curriculum is divided to 2 theoretical days and the rest of the week is practicals. They study Arabic, English, mathematics and sciences and other disciplines that serve the jewelry and precious metals.
I think this school is a great leap for gold and jewelry manufacturing. It is the first of its kind in Egypt and the Middle East. With it, we can compete in the international market because there are only 2 others like it in the world, one in Germany and the other in Italy. This is the third.
With a mission to empower women, this gold crafts school prioritizes the training of young girls. The Egyptian government is planning to build 50 schools like this one to cater for various industries.
These schools are owned by the state and will remain so. Our partnership is with the industrial sector, which invests in these kids, and then they can benefit by employing these talents in their businesses. To have schools properly equipped and renovated, that will make the children want to go to school. It will make them love learning and love the craft.
In 2019, Egypt's total gold exports reached $823 million. During the first 5 months this year, that figure jumped to $1.38 billion, a 78% increase from the same period last year. Beside its hunt for gold crafts talents, Egypt is also boosting its gold mining and production capacities. The country is offering gold mining licenses for domestic and international companies in its eastern desert. Adel Mahroui, CGTN, Ras Sidr, Egypt.
Let's take a final look at the markets on the currencies front. The South African rand was under pressure yet again today. While the JSE had closed in the green, not so for the rand. It was down ever so slightly and is now trading at 16.67 to the greenback. Nigeria's naira was up 0.2% and is now trading at 389 to the dollar. We've seen Kenya's shilling weaken slightly against the dollar, particularly around mid-July, but it seemed to begin making some gains from about the end of last week. That upward trend continued today, and that's despite some of the not-so-great report that came out of the Q1 analysis report regarding Kenya's credit situation. Kenya's shilling currently trading at 107 shillings and 71 cents to the dollar. Well, that's all the news we have for you on Global Business. Remember that you can send your feedback to the contacts on the screen and follow us on digital media platforms. From me, Hannah Viviers, thank you so much for watching. We'll see you again next time.